Most people are told their blood work is normal, but normal is not optimal. I'm Tanya Malik Chawla, and this is Biology by Design. Your biology is not something that happens to you, it is something you design. So let's get started.
She had PCOS for 5 years, but her period came back in 8 weeks, and here's why. She hadn't had a period in 5 years. She was 26 years old. She was on metformin. She was on the pill. She had been told her PCOS was chronic, that this was just how her biology worked. 8 weeks after we started working together, her cycle came back on its own. No hormonal medication, no fertility treatment, but here is the thing most PCOS content won't tell you. Her insulin levels were still elevated when her periods came back. Which means this wasn't a metabolic reversal. This was something else entirely. And understanding what it was might completely change how you think about your own PCOS. I'm Tanya Malik Chawla, a functional medicine and biohacking practitioner and nutrigenomics researcher. I work with high performers on root cause health optimization, gut health, hormones, metabolism, and biological age. This is the Root Cause Files. Every episode, I take on one real clinical case, anonymized of course, and walk you through the complete biology by design process, what the data showed, what we found upstream, what we changed, and what happened to the markers. Not theory, no generic advice, actual numbers before and after. Today's case is one of the most important ones I've published because it challenges something that is deeply embedded in both conventional and functional medicine PCOS frameworks. The assumption that PCOS is primarily a metabolic disorder. In this case, it wasn't, and the data proves it. Our patient is a 26-year-old woman. She came to me after 5 years of no periods. That means she had a period and then completely lost it for 5 whole years. She had been diagnosed with PCOS. She was on oral contraceptive pills, on and off. Every time she took them, she would get a withdrawal bleed, but not a real menstrual cycle. She was on metformin, the standard insulin sensitizing medication. Neither had restored her natural cycle, not in 5 years. She came in with chronic fatigue, weight that just wouldn't budge despite all her efforts, and a history of being told that this is just how your PCOS works. When I looked at her initial blood work, I saw something that explained everything, and it had nothing to do with insulin. Let me walk you through what I was looking at. Her inflammation markers were extraordinary. HSCRP was at 16.62. Normal, by the way, is below 1 and optimal is below 0.5. Hers was 16.62. This is not mildly elevated inflammation. This is a body in a state of significant immune activation. Her ESR was 85, extremely elevated. WBCs at 12.02, also elevated, with elevated neutrophils and eosinophils. This was a clear systemic inflammatory picture. This is a body fighting something hard. Then we came to her neuroendocrine markers. Morning cortisol was up to 39.8. Optimal is between 10 and 15. Her stress response system was running at maximum output. Prolactin at 39.1. Optimal is between 3 and 10. Hers was 4 times the upper end of the optimal. And then her reproductive markers, estrogen at 13, suppressed, progesterone at 0.8, essentially absent, LH to FSH ratio at 2.9, disrupted. Her ovarian signaling had essentially shut down. And then yes, of course, her metabolic markers, fasting insulin was elevated at 18.2, triglycerides at 128, metabolic dysfunction was present, but look at the pattern. Inflammatory markers were extreme, stress hormones were extreme, metabolic markers were elevated, yes, but not dramatically out of range compared to everything else that was happening. This was the first signal. This was not a metabolic case. This was an inflammatory-neuroendocrine case with secondary metabolic dysfunction. Before I tell you what we did, I want to explain why 5 years of treatment hadn't worked. Because this is the most important part of this case. The standard PCOS framework, both conventional and functional medicine, starts with the assumption that PCOS is primarily metabolic. Insulin resistance drives androgens, androgens disrupt ovulation. Fix the insulin, fix the hormones, and you fix PCOS. That framework is correct in many PCOS presentations, but metabolic phenotype is real and common. However, for these phenotypes, metformin works, berberine works, low glycemic eating, optimizing protein, and strength training, all of these work fabulously. But here is what the framework misses. The hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, or the HPO axis, the signaling chain that controls your cycle, is extremely sensitive to two things that are not insulin. Number one, systemic inflammation. Number two, stress hormones. When inflammatory cytokines are chronically elevated, like in her case, they impair hypothalamus's ability to pulse GnRH, the hormone that starts the entire reproductive cycle signaling. No GnRH pulse, no LH surge, no ovulation. And when cortisol is chronically elevated, the same hypothalamic suppression occurs through a completely different method. Your body is in survival mode. Remember, reproduction is not a priority for a body that believes it is under threat. Reproduction is energy expensive, it is immune expensive. If your body feels unsafe and goes into preservation mode, it will not spend energy on something that is not essential. Which means suppressing expensive functions like reproduction when chronically elevated cortisols are present is a direct stress response. Her prolactin at 39.1 is an extension of this exact same thing. Prolactin at that level does not come from nothing. It rises in response to stress, inflammation, hypothalamic disruption, and elevated prolactin directly suppresses GnRH. Prolactin is literally the brakes to ovulation. It's your pituitary gland telling your body we are not safe to reproduce. Her markers pointed to imbalanced dopamine and catecholamine signaling. She was caught in a loop of inflammation, elevated cortisol, and prolactin. The suppressed HPO axis meant no ovulation. No ovulation meant the metabolic dysfunction only increases with time. So metformin was addressing the metabolic arm of this loop, but the inflammatory and neuroendocrine arms, the actual root causes, were left untouched. This is why her cycle did not return in 5 years. Not because the treatment was wrong, because it was treating only one layer and in the wrong order. In biology by design, the first step is to read. You look at the full picture, not just a single marker in isolation. You don't treat the body as an isolated organ, but a system in its whole. When I read her panel, the pattern was clear. This was not primarily a metabolic disorder. This was an inflammatory-neuroendocrine dominant phenotype. The primary drivers, number one, systemic immune activation. Something was keeping her body in chronic inflammatory state. Number two, stress-mediated neuroendocrine suppression. Cortisol at 39.8, prolactin at 39.1 were not coincidental. 3. Nutrition deficiencies, compounding both. Iron saturation at 8%, this is critical. Vitamin D was insufficient. They weren't the cause, but they were removing the body's capacity to regulate inflammation and support hormonal signaling. And the metabolic dysfunction was real, but in this context of the picture, it was secondary amplifier and not the primary root cause. Number 2, you go to diagnosis. What is the upstream cause of this imbalance? The inflammatory elevation does not happen without a trigger. What could be the causes? Gut permeability or a leaky gut, chronic infection, immune dysregulation. And that is why dietary triggers combined with a depleted system can lead to this kind of a phenotype. In this case, a combination of gut-derived immune activation and chronic stress load. Once you see the loop, you know where to break it. Number 3, we design the protocol. The protocol always follows the diagnosis. We were not targeting PCOS in this case at all. We were targeting the 3 upstream drivers: inflammation, neuroendocrine dysregulation, and nutrition depletion. First, we reduced systemic inflammatory load. How did we do this? We eliminated common dietary inflammatory triggers: gluten, dairy, and refined sugars. as a 90-day experiment to reduce immune activation burden. While we address the underlying drivers, we introduce more anti-inflammatory support like omega-3 at therapeutically high doses of 4000 mg, quercetin to support mast cell stability, and targeted gut intervention to remove pathogens and build the gut lining with things like glutamine, zinc, carnosine. Second, neuroendocrine regulation. This is the part most protocols skip, but one of the most important factors because cortisol at 39.8 will not come down with nutrition alone. We focused on vagal tone exercises twice a day. This is not woo. Vagal tone directly regulates your HPA axis, the cortisol production system. If you want cortisol to come down, you need vagal nerve activation. You know that the vagal nerve is something that goes from your brain all the way to your gut and is extremely responsible to ensure that your central nervous system can shift from its sympathetic fight or flight mode to its parasympathetic rest, recover, and maintain mode. Then we move to structured sleep hygiene, consistent sleep timing, magnesium and glycine at night for HPA axis regulation, stress load reduction as a clinical intervention, not just try and relax, a systemic reduction in the sympathetic nervous system inputs. Third and most misunderstood step, protein optimization and muscle protein synthesis trigger. We took protein up to 100 to 120 grams every single day. We brought in progressive resistance training only 2 or 3 sessions per week, not as a metabolic support arm, but for giving the body the resources it needed to repair and recover, to fuel adrenals, to support ovarian output. See, the problem is a lot of us think of protein as just muscle fuel. It is in fact the building block of everything we are, from our cells, organ lining, neurotransmitters, skin repair, DNA repair, gut lining repair. And then we brought in the fourth, which is nutritional repletion. Iron saturation at 8% is a clinical emergency for a woman. We corrected this aggressively. We started iron in specific forms with vitamin C at specific timings. Also vitamin D, we did daily doses with K2 and methylated B vitamins for methylation support. Her homocysteine was also on the higher side. 8 weeks, and here is what the follow-up panel showed. HSCRP came down from 16.62 to 4.5. Still elevated, still work to do, but a 73% reduction in 8 weeks alone. ESR came down from 85 to 11. This is a near normalization. Prolactin came down from 39.1 to 8.97, from 4 times her upper optimal to squarely within ranges. In 8 weeks, WBC started normalizing, sleep quality significantly improved, energy returned to normal, and she lost 8 kgs, not from calorie restriction, from the removal of inflammatory load and cortisol-driven fat storage. This is something a lot of women miss. In the drive to try and lose weight, we put our bodies under even more chronic stress, and unfortunately, this is the cortisol-driven cycle of fat storage. In this case, we broke that cycle, and her menstrual cycle returned naturally without hormonal medication after 5 years. Now here is the critical data point. Her fasting insulin before intervention was at 18.2. After intervention, it actually went up to 29.7. Yes, her insulin went up, not down, and her cycle still returned. This is the most important number in the entire case because it is the data point that proves the diagnosis. If this had been a metabolic PCOS case, if insulin resistance had been the primary driver of her ovarian suppression, her cycle returning would have required insulin to normalize first. It did not. Her cycle came back because her inflammation came down, because her prolactin normalized, because the HPO axis was no longer being suppressed by the inflammatory-neuroendocrine load. The metabolic dysfunction was real. It is still being addressed, but it was not the gatekeeper. Inflammation was, neuroendocrine dysregulation was. And this is what an inflammatory neuroendocrine dominant PCOS phenotype looks like in clinical practice. This is not rare. It's dramatically underdiagnosed. If you have PCOS or you've been told you have PCOS, I want you to sit with that, with what this case is telling you. Not all PCOS is the same. There are at least 4 recognized phenotypes. Number 1, metabolic, driven primarily by insulin resistance. Yes, very common. But there is also inflammatory, driven by systemic immune activation that can happen because of even a leaky gut. Third is neuroendocrine, driven primarily by stress axis dysregulation. Remember, when you are chronically pushing yourself in calorie deficit, your cortisol is going to respond. And then there is also a mixed type, which is a combination of a few above. Most PCOS content talk only about the metabolic phenotype because it is common, because metformin works for it, because the low-carb, high-protein strength training protocol produces result. But if you have been doing everything right, the diet, the training, the berberine, the inositol, and your cycle still won't come back to normal, ask a different question. Not how do I reduce testosterone, but why is my fasting insulin high? Why is inflammatory load elevated? Why are my cortisol and prolactin elevated? What is suppressing my HPO access upstream? These are the questions Biology by Design asks. The markers that would tell you if this applies to you: HSCRP. If it's above 1, your inflammation picture needs investigation. If your morning cortisol is above 17, your stress axis is compromised. If your prolactin is above 15, in a non-lactating woman, your reproductive signaling is being disrupted. Look at your ESR, your WBC, the immune activation picture. These are not exotic tests. These are part of your standard panel. The difference is knowing what to look for and what each pattern means. And if your inflammatory markers are elevated, look at your gut immune axis, which is almost always involved. Remember, your gut is where 70% of your immune system lives. When it is permeable or leaky, when dysbiosis is present, when dietary triggers are persistently activating immune system, the downstream effect reaches every hormonal axis in your body, including the ones that control your cycle and reproduction. Let me close this case with Biology by Design framework, because the framework is more important than just one single case. Step 1, read. We looked at her full biomarker panel, not just her reproductive hormones. The pattern is what told the story. 2, diagnose. We identified the upstream drivers, the root causes: inflammation, neuroendocrine suppression, not metabolic dysfunction, despite it actually being present. And then step 3, that is design. The protocol targeted the upstream drivers, the root causes, neuroendocrine regulation first, inflammation reduction second, metabolic stabilization third. Nutritional repletion, of course, is always the foundation that continues to remain. And then we come to iterate. 8 weeks in, we ran a follow-up marker. The inflammation had responded, the prolactin had responded, the cycle had returned, the insulin hadn't moved. So insulin remains the focus for the next phase. The protocol evolves with data. Your stack, your routine, your protocol must do the same. This is not a protocol you copy. This is a methodology you apply to your data, your markers, your phenotype, because PCOS is not one condition, it is a phenotype. And how you treat it depends entirely on what is driving it in your specific biology. If you've been struggling with PCOS and you feel like you're doing everything right and nothing is working, this case exists for you. Not to tell you your doctors are wrong, but to say there may be a layer that hasn't been looked at yet. And that layer might be the one that changes everything. And if you want to go deeper between episodes, join my community Biology by Design, link in the description below.